Mini episode 1506 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1506. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris here with you today. And we have back with us here today one of our favorite folks to bring in and talk about the great game of football. He is a college football writer as well as a USFL and XFL writer for our Sports Central, our good friend Fran Stuchbury, and a part of our FDH Lounge family of dignitaries here. And pleasure to get him in to talk about the 2022 college football season. Looking ahead here, a lot of continuity, it seems like, as far as the top programs and what they're projected to do, but some interesting wrinkles, and we're going to try and get into as many of them as we can here today. So let me bring him in, our good friend Fran Stuchbury. Fran, thanks for making time for us today. Appreciate it.
Like the holiday tradition for us.
It kind of is, yeah. Football is about to start. It is the new year coming up soon for all those who love the gridiron and all those who love following this at all different levels, as I know you do. I know you watch football at all levels professionally and at all levels collegiately here. We'll be focusing, of course, on the major conferences today as we go along, and we'll be tackling subsequently here, you and I, shortly thereafter here in the lounge, look at the overall landscape and how it's changed over the summer, both in terms of the realignment that's happening, the realignment that's potentially pending, and the TV contracts. We'll be getting to that in a subsequent segment here, but as far as right now, any kind of big picture thoughts here as we kind of head into the season and how the off season has kind of impacted what to look forward to in 2022?
NIL has a big impact, the transfer portal, and players moving all over the place. But Rick, basically, it seems like a three-team race so far. As far as the preseason rankings are concerned, when you're going to have Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. We'll see if that changes anytime soon, but that's what it seems like a three-team race right now.
It absolutely looks that way, and I can say, from having worked on Fantasy Football Draftology 2002, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. Go check it out, free guide for the season. But beyond fantasy football, with some pro and college content in there as well, I always do my standings projections, and as I was telling you off air, Fran, that's a key thing of what I look at every year is I average together what the polls say, and Alabama was the consensus number one, and then from there, Ohio State was in number two in more of the polls than Georgia, but 2 and 3 right there, and then there was a big drop down as far as the next teams in there. There was a second tier that kind of formed behind them, so the projection is we are looking at those three teams being in the playoffs this year. That's what most people would think. And then that fourth team could come from a very interesting and diffuse mix. I think you and I are probably picking different teams as far as who the fourth one in the mix might be, but it's kind of hard to believe that it could be both Ohio State and Michigan, but theoretically that could be the case. Texas A&M is super highly regarded, but you're not going to get three SEC teams in there. Of course, Clemson, Notre Dame, those are the perennial teams around here in the mix. Utah, if they're lucky enough to come out of the Pac-12 undefeated, which nobody ever does because they cannibalize themselves, but Utah potentially, Oklahoma. It's a deep tier fighting for that fourth spot potentially.
Yeah, it's kind of mixed bags, but I'll be honest with Rick, if the ACC is as weak as I think it's going to be this season, if Clemson can get back to their old ways, I think they have the edge to be at 14. It depends if their quarterback, I won't say his last name, but if he can bounce back and play better, they can creep in as that fourth spot.
Totally agree. They definitely can. And in terms of the teams projected to make the playoffs, we start with the two teams who were in the national championship game last year, Alabama and Georgia. They are decent favorites in their own respective divisions here, the SEC East and West. In the East, Georgia will have to fend off a Kentucky program that has stuck around at a pretty high level the last couple of seasons here. They look to be perhaps the toughest competition there. Tennessee off to a fairly decent start under the new regime there. I'm always hopeful as a Vols fan that that'll be the case, that they'll keep improving. Billy Napier at Florida, it's been an interesting start to his tenure. There's some ups and downs in the offseason. So the Eastern Division, Georgia stands above everybody else, but there are some teams that are going to be hoping for the upset when they go to play them in the West. Alabama, Texas A&M, we're projecting that as one of the games of the year when they play each other. That one is going to be on October 8th, A&M at Alabama. That will be definitely one of the games of the year. Behind them, you've got Arkansas, Mississippi, LSU. It kind of falls off kind of behind them. Auburn not really projected to be as big of a part of the mix this year. But again, you have the two giants in the SEC, Fran, and like I said, A&M probably the closest to them in terms of talent level with Jimbo Fisher there, what the projections are going to be as far as them taking another step forward. So in some ways, it looks like just a typical year in the SEC, but there is the potential in both divisions maybe for some curveballs here and there.
Oh, they could be the curveball, and Craig McElroy, ESPN, when you was hype at Tennessee, so we'll see. Come on, every year we hear it, but I think Tennessee has a chance to, maybe have a season similar to what Ole Miss did last season.
Yeah, very possible. And again, any kind of sustained kind of improvement and growth is going to be very, very welcomed down at Rocky Top right now, because it's been one step forward, two steps back for the last 10 years, maybe longer, really, probably even pre-Lane Kiffin. Things have been getting kind of rough there. So definitely Tennessee would take that. You've got a projection by just about everybody, as we're saying, that the SEC championship game will be a rematch of the national championship game, Alabama and Georgia. And that was one where, again, going into the national championship game, it was one of those things, and I was a little more down on Georgia going into last year than some people were, because there were some people that were thinking it was the year. Kirby Smart had reached the point of guilty until proven innocent, that it looked to me like it was a better version of the Mark Richt program, but taking that final step forward. And then they did so. They did so definitively in the national championship game, solidly. 3 years after losing the previous national championship game, they were able to break through. Again, may get a rematch in the SEC championship game. I think it's very likely, and potentially another rematch in the playoffs.
Yeah, it definitely won't surprise me. Until they expand the playoff field, we might be seeing two SEC teams, for a long, long time.
Very possibly so, yes. And if there is another conference where that can be said, it would definitely be the Big Ten. But it is the Eastern Division in the Big Ten that is very tilted. Ohio State back in their usual role as favorites, but Michigan punching through, getting the win last year. You want to talk about, again, guilty until proven innocent. Jim Harbaugh finally getting the job done. Michigan's first win over a non-interim Ohio State coach since 2003. You go back to 2011, of course, the win that Michigan had that year was over interim coach Luke Fickell. Michigan will be going for their first win in Columbus in 22 years this November. But before that, as I said to you off air, I will be there for what we're projecting as the FDH game of the year in the regular season, Saturday of Labor Day weekend against Notre Dame. That one is going to be huge in prime time in Columbus. So again, Ohio State, Michigan, you've got Michigan State, Penn State, each of them trying to kind of jump up to that level. And again, neither has quite been able to do that. Michigan State had a pretty good season going last year till they met Ohio State, and then it got disastrous in a hurry. But again, those teams all kind of jockeying in the East Division. In the West, again, it looks like just another typical kind of a year. You've got Wisconsin towards the top. They might be the favorite. They are in my book. But you've got Iowa and Minnesota not too far behind them. Purdue trying to kind of consolidate and take another step forward, which they really haven't been able to do in the last year or so. Nebraska, it's kind of a now or never kind of a season for Scott Frost in year 5. So all across the Big Ten, it's definitely a more interesting landscape than it was a year ago because Ohio State at least showed a vulnerability against Michigan that they hadn't shown in a long time. A lot of that had to do with the defense. Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator, we'll see if that helps restore Ohio State to being a legitimate national championship contender this year.
Well, I think Ohio State's going to be the team out of the Big Ten. I think Michigan's going to take a step back after that was season last year. Plus, issue of the games at Ohio State. So, let's see Jim Harbaugh. It's funny. Jim Harbaugh was on the hot seat for years and years and years. He finally breaks that crack. But the thing is, if you want to destroy that crack, win the game at Ohio State, Rick. Win the game at Ohio State.
Well, yeah, and that's what it's going to take. He still has that burden of proof. Again, not having won in Columbus in 22 years. But it's an interesting thing because Ohio State, and again, as somebody who has a deep and burning memory of the John Cooper years, it seems almost impossible to say this, but it's been the case that Ohio State, I'm not going to say was taking for granted beating Michigan all those years, but it was impossible for them to feel much in the way of fear and loathing towards Michigan like when they were regularly getting it handed to them. You now have a different dynamic this year, and in the word coming out of Columbus, and they've got the score of last year's game and everything like that hung all around the football training center. There's reminders everywhere you turn around. It's been a long, long time since Ohio State was as motivated by Michigan because Michigan didn't have it within them to motivate them. Now that it's happened, and now that they have Ryan Day's attention and the attention of that entire program, it will be an interesting dynamic.
It's a rivalry, finally. It's finally a team that can play against Ohio State. In the Big Ten, you have Wisconsin with their mascot football. You have my favorite coach, rows the boat out of Minnesota. And you have Jeff Brown, who throws the football everywhere for Purdue with his offense. So Illinois, we'll see what happens with them. But the Big Ten is always, it's kind of like some of the teams are clustered, Rick. That's what it seems like. You have some of the teams, you have the cream at the top, and you have like 5 teams jam-packed in the middle.
You do, really. And then ultimately, and then you have a bottom tier as well, which, again, Rutgers is trying to fight their way out of forever, and some of these teams. So, yeah, the Big Ten, much like the SEC, a decent amount of continuity here. Continuity does seem to be the watchword for a number of these conferences here. In the Big 12, you've got a lot of the usual suspects on top, notwithstanding a coaching change. Brent Venables now in Norman. Oklahoma still the favorite to a lot of people, including myself, but not far behind them, Baylor, who has really established themselves as a monster in this conference. Oklahoma State, Texas. This is going to be kind of a make or break kind of a season for Sarkisian to see if he can kind of bring them up to another level. And then you kind of get to the teams in the middle here who are all kind of struggling to various degrees to contend with the top 4, both of the state schools, Kansas State and Iowa State, West Virginia and TCU. So it's a conference that it seems like 1 through 4 at least is relatively top heavy coming into this season. And every one of the games between those 4 teams is going to carry a ton of weight for him.
Texas is going to first place vote in that coach's poll. Who did that? Brent Venables? Who gave Texas a first place vote in the coach's poll?
Yeah, that is whoever that was should have their vote revoked. And if it was Venables trying to play some kind of psychological deal, and we don't know that it is, we're just speculating here, but whoever it is, again, these things are supposed to be, I don't want to take myself too seriously and use the word sacred, but they're supposed to be a legitimate benchmark for excellence and a projection of what is going to happen for this year. So whoever did that, whoever put them in there, it's inexcusable and they should lose their vote.
Interesting, a non-conference game, Texas, Alabama. How many points is Alabama going to win that game by?
Well, it's very interesting. I frankly expect it to be pretty competitive. That game will be at Alabama September 10th, and that is in our ranking in the aforementioned Fantasy Football Draftology 2002, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. That is our number 7 projected college game of the year. So that one really could carry a lot of weight to it. I think Alabama's going to win that game, and that kind of takes us to our projections, which we'll get to later on. I don't expect Alabama to take an L, but I expect it to be a very competitive game, Fran. Perhaps surprisingly so to a lot of people.
A year from now, someone has to fight well to
Yeah,
keep the Manning kid legacy on the bench. But
that's right.
The Big 12, a team to keep out for a sleep team, Kansas State, because they get Adrian Martinez, the Nebraska quarterback, the transfer. Some people think that might be a sleep team. I mean, he didn't impress me much with Nebraska, but I think that's Scott Frost and that bad offense. We'll see if Adrian Martinez can be a better quarterback in Kansas State.
Yeah, no, he didn't impress me much, with all due respect to Shania Twain, when he was at Nebraska. So, yeah, I don't know how people think he's going to lift up another program here. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the programs like Kansas State, I mean, they're going to be, fishing around for their bowl entries. Games will be played somewhere in the vicinity of like December 27th. I think that's where we can pencil a couple of these schools in as per usual. Conference that they are thought to be potentially merging with at some point, or rating, or whatever, as the college football landscape goes through its convulsions, the Pac-12. And so you've got a very interesting setup. And this is where it starts to get a little bit more fluid, perhaps, because you're talking about, in the North Division, a Civil War game, which is going to amount to maybe a little more than usual when Oregon and Oregon State play each other. That could be very well for the North Division title. Oregon's got a big non-conference game early on. What we're projecting as the number 2 game of the college football season, Georgia versus Oregon in Atlanta. Why don't we just say Oregon at Georgia, right, if it's in Atlanta? But I guess technically it's a neutral site game. But you've got Washington still looming in the North Division as a team that could maybe make some noise along with the 2 Oregon schools. The South is where it gets interesting, because I'm projecting Utah to win the division, but Lincoln Riley in year 1 at USC, bringing in a lot of the short-termers here in the gates in LA. So USC, through better coaching and probably better recruiting, including the transfer portal, could be taking a step up. You pointed out to me off air, if you just look at the schedule, UCLA has a very good argument for being a team that could go through. I'm not sure about undefeated, because they do draw both Oregon and Washington this year, but a team that has at least a chance schedule-wise to go through much of the regular season with 0 or 1 losses. So the South Division looks to be one of the most interesting and intrigue-filled ones in all of college football, Fran.
Yeah, I mean, some people, UCLA might be a sleeper team. UCLA may have a better season than USC year 1, only because of the weak non-conference schedule. They could be a 10-win team, which Chip Kelly and 10-win teams. When's the last time he won 10 games in any league he's coached in?
Yeah, it's you got to think back on that, and that is something that conceivably could put them in one of the New Year's 6 games. They could work their way into that rotation. And hey, what if it was Oregon or Utah that managed to make the college football playoff? You could be looking at UCLA with another home game in the Rose Bowl potentially. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, a lot of strange things have happened. One thing I want to give props to are Arizona State with Herm Edwards. He's like a commander of the ship. You like that coaching strategy? He just basically like runs like an army, and they just execute. But they've done better than I expected. I'm surprised he hasn't been fired yet, but he actually gets them competitive, and he gets in the ball games. That's all they really want in Arizona State, and to be Arizona. But Arizona is terrible. That's not story.
Well, yeah, Arizona is terrible. Colorado likewise in the South, but Arizona State, yeah, I do think it is something of a make or break kind of a season for Herm Edwards there as far as taking a step up, and I think break is more likely than make. But it's one of those things where you put in a style and a system and everything like that, kind of like Georgia Tech, right? Like, we're going to do it our way. We're going to run our kind of offense. Herm Edwards made it clear when he took the job, as somebody who'd never been a college football coach previously, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do it my way. It's going to be different than a lot of other people. Say what you will about the man. He has been different. I don't know that it's always been for the better, but he has been different from everyone else. And yeah, it's time to start paying dividends, because I'm not sure that another bowl game, like I said, plus or minus on December 27th, I think that's going to be getting old at Arizona State right there. That is a program where they look at it and they have a decent amount of institutional advantages, a decent amount of money. They're a program that should be competing for the South most years, I would say. And Herm Edwards hasn't taken them to that level.
Yeah, he hasn't. He hasn't. But eventually they're gonna have to win a little bit more, because other coaches they pull the plug on much quicker.
Very much so, yeah, and that's something where you better keep eyes in the back of his head if it's another 8-4 season or whatever. But in the ACC, we will see if the status quo ante resumes, because it was gone last year. Clemson with a down year. It had been sort of, Clemson and the 11 Dwarfs, or however many other teams in the conference. But they are, I guess it would be 13, I suppose, as I'm doing a quick scan of the number of teams there. But they shockingly last year, again, abdicated even the Atlantic Division championship here. So you've got them. They're going to be dealing with a resurgent North Carolina State program, Wake Forest, Florida State, again, still scratching and clawing, trying to get their rebuild going on. In the Coastal Division, you have the defending champion of the league, Pittsburgh, but they appear to be looking up, as a lot of people would think, at Miami. I'm expecting to see the immediate benefits from Mario Cristobal being there. North Carolina, disappointing as a year ago, but could loom as a potential contender. Virginia, if everything goes right for them. So it's an interesting situation here. I'm forecasting Clemson and Miami being in the ACC championship game. And that is a thing, Fran, where if it happens, that might actually be more of a competitive game and less of a foregone conclusion than we've been used to seeing from these two teams over the last decade.
I think that'll definitely be an exciting game. What do you think about Miami, Cristobal getting rid of the turnover chain? Because last year, when they were losing on the sidelines, they were getting turnovers and they were celebrating. Smart move, make it more. It's kind of cool for a low division school, but not Miami. That's supposed to, in the 80s, one, baby, one.
Yeah, you become a slave to the gimmick, basically. And it's just one of those things where the celebrating, that's a program, too, where they've always, more than most programs, right? They've always walked a knife edge between showboating and actual results on the field. And I would think that the culture change that they would want to be looking for with that program here is to, at least at minimum, first and foremost, establish themselves as big-time winners before you can really get back to the showboating kind of stuff like the turnover chain.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Wake Forest is a team to keep an eye on, but their quarterback now with an undisclosed injury, so we'll have to see when he comes back. I mean, the guy was great for them last year. Martin, he was outstanding for Wake Forest last year. And again, other aspects, I think about North Carolina when they lost to South Carolina at Belco. I think North Carolina lost on purpose. I don't think this the ageless wonder Mac Brown wanted to be done with mayonnaise that game.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the case, and I think avoiding that is something that you can definitely look for, going forward here. But in terms of the overall landscape for the New Year's Six bowl games and the national championship semifinals and final, my projections for the New Year's Six games, I'm looking at Orange Bowl, Notre Dame over Michigan State, Rose Bowl, Michigan over Utah, Sugar Bowl, Texas A&M over Oklahoma, and Cotton Bowl. Nobody will have to travel too far for this one, Baylor over Houston. I've got Ohio State over Georgia in the Fiesta Bowl, Alabama over Clemson in the Peach Bowl, Alabama over Ohio State in the national championship game. I know you might differ from me on a couple of these things, Fran.
I could be wrong. We'll see what happens this year if the term Clemson comes back again, like it did in the past.
Yeah, and that's what it's going to be contingent on, is getting the strong quarterback play as they have previously. And again, these are games that, I think are going to draw monster numbers if it materializes here. Alabama over Clemson, in the national semifinals. I think we've seen this once before. That's been a game that's more so been in the championship game, but that would draw, I think, a pretty big number. The Ohio State and Georgia factors as well. So I don't know how many years we're looking left at the same system, Fran. This might be one of the last years of the 4-team playoff, but if it's these 4 teams, arguably the 4 most successful teams of this era with the college football playoff, it'll be probably in one of the final years of this setting, kind of going out with a bang.
Well, I think that's what will be, and of course this year it's on New Year's Eve, but you don't want it to be on New Year's Eve because New Year's Eve is Saturday on the calendar, so not going to have those low ratings.
Yeah, and they've generally tried to avoid it a lot of years. The first year they put it on New Year's Eve, which I think was 2016 maybe, but whatever year it was, I just thought it was the stupidest thing because it was a deal where you just knew. Again, people love to go out on New Year's Eve. I mean, it's an easier thing now. I mean, if people can watch it on their phones, it's an option that you didn't have obviously in the 1950s or whatever. But as far as making it something where people are going to stay home and watch the college football semifinals, that's just a thing where you can't compete with what America's already doing on New Year's Eve, all the different places they're going and everything like that. And that's where they've tried to avoid it as much as possible and go to that Saturday before New Year's.
One thing is probably with New Year's, more people may be able to watch the first game completely than the second game because the first game is going to be 4 o'clock, second game is going to be 8 o'clock. So usually around that time, unless you live on the West Coast, you have a life.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing where if you guess wrong on what the late game should be, there's going to be consequences to it because I remember, I think it was Alabama and Michigan State. So maybe it was 2015. Maybe I'm thinking of that year when it was, and that was a disaster. That was just an absolute brutal disaster. Because I think it was like a 38-0 game. Everybody tuned out by halftime. It was basically the ratings Hindenburg, and that was the death knell. Probably one of the most influential games in college football TV history because that was the death knell of regularly scheduling the games for New Year's Eve. That it was only going to happen on certain occasions.
Yeah, it's really exciting football team. This whole comes out of nowhere. But like last year at Cincinnati, let's hope we have some sort of Cinderella team to just get us excited. Something else. I mean, not the same stuff every year. I mean, last year we got Michigan, Cincinnati. Let's get some more parity. Please, NIL, you spend the money. Come on, let's get some parity.
Well, yes, and we'll see how NIL continues to influence in the years to come. We are very early in that story. The 2020s decade is going to see a very big shakeout thanks to NIL and some other factors. And again, the next segment that we do here in the FDH Lounge will be one looking at a little bit more of the big picture developments in college football and the things that are happening to influence the future of college football. But as far as it goes for the 2022 season, as I knew it would be, an amazing preview with you, Fran Stuchbury of our Sports Central. Thank you so much for being here today, Fran.
Thanks, Bert.
Appreciate it, and thank you everybody for checking out FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1506.